Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Mike, it's August 22nd, my birthday.
Congratulations.
Was yesterday.
You've made another one.
I'm now 77, so... You know, in these years, you're just happy to have another birthday. Better than the alternative.
We're the lucky ones that get to have these extra
Yes,
birthdays.
we are. Yeah. And so from our generation, this is our, I don't know exactly the number that we have here, but it's the 22nd of August, and you want to talk about the public versus private ownership, government involvement in the economy versus not. I think it's a great topic. Lots and lots of different things to cover, and so you're going to drive the ship today, and I'm going to comment.
Yes, so when we finished our last podcast, we agreed this was a general topic. It was kind of inarticulate because it seemed to be running through a lot of the other things we were talking about. So since that initial discussion, I've tried to lay out the kind of areas that we want to cover, and let's try to cover all these areas. One has to do with ownership and individual rights, and morally, what belongs to individuals and what belongs to government. Okay, we've talked a lot about the origin of the United States and its idea that rights are in the individual and it hires the government, as opposed to the universal pattern before that governments were sovereign and that people were subjects. Okay. So that enters
and in that case, the way you describe that, when you say governments were sovereign, and the people were subjects. What you're saying there is that all property rights resided with the people who had the authority in the government, because they're the ones who decide how to allocate the resources.
And they allocate it to people, grant it to them, but it started with the government, and the United States turned that upside down.
Yes.
So there's a moral argument about dignity and rights and sovereignty.
Right.
In our way of government, individuals have sovereignty that they don't in other ways, in other governments. There's also an efficiency argument that we want to talk about, because the private sector is more efficient than the public sector, and we want to talk about why.
Okay.
Then there are issues of accountability. You know, who owes what to who else, and that goes both ways, actually, I think, with government and individuals. We can talk about the commons, you know, where we all have an interest in things as opposed to proprietary things like patents that inure to a private interest. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of edge cases that particularly troublesome these days, non-governmental organizations, foundations that are in and around the edges of government get huge amounts of grants, and then they do basically partisan work at government expense. And it tends to promote the growth of government, the accumulation of government power, the degradation of private sector scope of rights and wealth.
Okay. Now, one thing I want to add to that, where you were talking about efficiency, is general prosperity. And that is when we talk about the proper relationship and ownership of these types of issues that you brought up, which leads to a higher level of prosperity for the largest number of people.
Everyone.
Not everyone.
Yes.
You can't.
The largest number, yes.
The largest number of people possible.
Yes, and not everybody is wealthy, but it's supposedly, this was the utilitarian argument. There's a name for this in the 1700s. John Stuart Mill and others believed in the greatest good for the greatest number.
Yes. So as we look at these policies, will this lead to the greatest good for the greatest number? Because there's a lot of political arguments. What people do is they take an exception, and then they create a rule from the exception. They say no. If anyone is homeless, then our system is broken.
Yes.
And that's
you can't operate that way.
You cannot operate that way. But if the premise, if the operation is based on that, then everybody will end up homeless.
Yeah. So there's a practical argument about what produces the best result, and then there's a moral argument about what's the right principle to live by.
There we go. Okay.
So we've seen, as Trump has come to office now, he's doing lots of new deals, and including those in critical sectors that involve national security. So, for instance, Intel makes semiconductors. The government's done a deal with them, and the government now owns 15% of Intel, I believe is the number.
Yeah. Now, may I ask you a question here? Because I
Yes.
don't know the answer. So with the Intel deal that you're describing, did Intel agree to that based on an offer made by the government, or did Trump just say you're a national security, you're a company that is involved in national security products, we're going to take 15%? Did Intel get anything?
Well, they did a transaction where the government gave them some guarantees, and there was a deal made. And so I'm sure that there was a quid pro quo in that deal. I think I haven't seen the deal, so when I say I'm sure, I'm confident that you can't get away with just conscripting 15%.
Well,
that's what they do in Russia. They just come in and say, if you don't do this, we're going to own your business, and you can't do this, and so they own your business.
Yeah. So my question is did Intel have a right to turn down the deal and not give up the 15%? I guess
I think the answer is probably yes, but then you get into innuendo or semantics about what kind of choice did they have.
Well,
it's a tough situation, and so they took the best deal they could, but maybe they couldn't really walk away from it. Deal you can't refuse kind of thing.
Well, that's the question.
Yeah, they were in a tight spot.
Yeah.
But you have three companies like this. You also have a firm called MP Materials that's in rare earths.
Okay.
We have a big problem with being dependent on China for rare earths, which are used to make semiconductors. And so it's really in the national interest to have a proprietary supply that we control. If we get into war, we don't depend on China.
Or at least a domestic supply.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you say proprietary,
I mean something we control, and I mean domestic.
You mean domestic.
In that sense, yes. And then U.S. Steel, they got what's called a golden share that I think it doesn't represent a financial interest, but it's a veto where the government can say, by terms of us giving you this license for Nippon, Japan's steel company, to buy U.S. steel, the government now has this golden share. Okay, so it's a little piece of government ownership of the means of production.
Or certainly control.
Control, yeah. They go together generally, but they can be distinguished, particularly in the case of steel companies. So the question here, there was a very interesting article written this past week in the Wall Street Journal. My guy said, this is really a bad precedent. This is the road to serfdom, using the title of a book by Friedrich Hayek, who was a very conservative writer in the mid-20th century. And
he was the lead at his time. He was the leading Austrian economist in the world.
Yeah, and that means not only being from Austria, but there was a whole school of thought related to Austria that was very much pro-individual.
Yes.
And against government coercion and ownership.
Yes.
So this author points out, in his words, lawmakers will soon argue that if chips and steel are too important to leave to free markets, food and medicine are as well. So here you can see the encroachment that typically comes from the left, where they're going to control and regulate and direct important industries. And there's really no limit to what you can consider important. There's housing, there's energy, there's education, and he's mentioned food and medicine.
Yeah. Now I will say this, in addition to what he's talking about, though, I would say that in the healthcare industry, there's already a significant amount of government intervention whereby it says to the private sector, if you're going to take money from Medicaid or Medicare or Obamacare, if you're going to take the money, then you will do medicine a certain way.
Yes.
You will do certain things. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all necessarily bad, but that's why there's some primary care doctors who have decided to become concierge doctors where they don't take any money from the government, and they just take a certain amount from the patients once a year, and they say, I'm going to provide you my best judgment, because I'm not going to let government tell me, and I'm using the COVID vaccines as an example where government mandated that people take the vaccines, and then government also told the entire healthcare sector, you promote oxychloroquine or ivermectin and you're in trouble. So we already have examples of what I consider to be significant government overreach. It's certainly in terms of individual rights. Certainly.
COVID was a giant example of this problem of public sovereignty over private interests. You could not refuse to take some of the vaccines, and when people did, they were jailed. So that's a good example. We developed a lot of controversies over that.
Yes.
Right. I want to point out that we also have education that's very much like healthcare.
Yes.
Where if you take government money, you're going to follow their rules.
Yes.
Okay.
And then our government-run schools, the public schools, I call them government-run schools.
Right.
Because they are run by the government.
Yes.
And so they truly, the government at varying levels does determine what the curriculum is, who the teachers are, and what the parents are forced to accept.
Yes.
And,
so we want to get to talk about the morality of this.
Yeah.
You know, who really owns what power, has what power, and has what sovereignty over these kinds of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So that then there's an efficiency argument. And let's go to that for a little bit.
Okay.
I think we can make a blanket statement that the private sector is more efficient than the public sector.
Yeah, and I want to, when I say, I like to use the term inherently, which doesn't mean always, but it means mostly, that tending toward.
Yes.
The private sector is inherently efficient. Not always, because businesses that start the people who start businesses expect those businesses to be profitable. They wouldn't start them. But if they aren't profitable, they go out of business.
Yes.
And so the private sector is a filter,
right?
And so it filters out inefficiency, because if a business loses more money than it takes in,
the market takes care of it.
Then it is by definition it's inefficient.
Yes.
In the government doesn't operate that way.
Right.
The other thing that I want to point out that I think is really important is understanding what competition does and what pricing does, and that is that if you don't have transparency in pricing, if you don't have that, then you can't possibly have a market. People have to be able to see all the prices.
Because people don't have a clear choice.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so what competition does is competition and pricing and profits, the combination of those three things. Those things signal the capital markets, where money is, on where somebody is making more money than they normally would.
Right.
And so it drives more capital to that industry to expand the supply of whatever the people making more money than normal. And that's what brings down the price.
That's a normal market function.
That's and government doesn't have that function.
Doesn't have a market because it doesn't have competition and doesn't have an alternative. At the federal level, there's no competition for the federal government. It does what it wants to do.
Right.
And if what it does fails, they ask for more money because they didn't get a big enough budget.
Right.
That's the standard answer.
Right.
Now, at the state level, it's a little different because states compete. And now we see states like California and Illinois and New York are losing residents because their policies are not good.
Yeah.
Okay, and so they're coming to places like Tennessee where we live.
Right.
So there is some level of competition at the state level.
Yes.
Okay, but it's still not a free market.
Yeah. Now, just before, because I want to just tell an interesting story. I was an investor. Just to make a point here, I was an investor in Nashville, Tennessee, in a piece of property that was located at I-24 and Old Hickory Boulevard toward Chattanooga. It was the last exit. This property was the last exit inside Davidson County, which is the county that Nashville, Tennessee is in.
Right.
Now you have surrounding counties. All of the surrounding counties had lower property taxes.
Yes.
Okay? And so the interchange, the next interchange away from Nashville was in the next county. The development at that interchange exploded 20 years before the development did at mine, even though my intersection was closer to the city, closer to Nashville. Okay, but people said, "Well, why would I pay taxes of $1, 1% taxes when I can go out one interchange and pay 50 cents in taxes?" And so, consequently, the interchange that was farther from town became 2 or 3 times more valuable per acre than the one that I had. Now, we ended up doing okay, but we were in it for 30 years. And I want to say, for example, if Kentucky has better taxes than Ohio. So Covington, Kentucky, which borders Cincinnati, but
Yes.
it's in Kentucky.
Yes.
Covington, Kentucky has prospered compared to Cincinnati. Clarksville, Tennessee shares a downtown street with a town called Hopkinsville. Hopkinsville is in Kentucky. Clarksville is in Tennessee. The Clarksville side of that town has done great. The Hopkinsville side of that town has not done great because there are taxes in Kentucky that aren't in Tennessee. And so what I'm saying is the point that you're making is states do compete
Yes.
with each other. And if you overtax your citizens, or if you tax them to the point where they believe they're overtaxed compared to an alternative state, they'll move.
So competition protects consumers,
Yes.
buyers. It
Yeah.
does not protect producers.
And doesn't and competition certainly in this case doesn't protect bigger government.
Yes. Yeah. So generally, the more competition, the better, because the lower the prices. And as we've said throughout this podcast, one of the things that produces prosperity is lower prices.
Right.
Government generally raises prices through regulation and other means.
And the other thing to your efficiency argument is part of the other thing the market does is people are always looking for cheaper ways to provide the same quality product.
Right.
And so for example,
Which leads to innovation.
Which leads to innovation.
Governments are not famous for innovation.
No. I mean, when back many years ago, Mike, about a little actually before we met, I was in the sporting goods distribution business and some retail stores, and we had a room that probably was 20 feet by 20 feet. That's the dimensions, and it was filled with national cash register computers, which ran the systems, which are the computers for our retail stores. We only had 7 retail stores. There's more power on my cell phone now. Those computers cost $500,000, which back then was a lot of money. That was a lot of money.
Yes.
Okay. And now my cell phone, if I sign up for a subscription with a carrier, I'll get my cell phone for free as part of the subscription.
You should have done that.
And so, well, these didn't exist. These did not exist. And this was productivity, innovation.
Yes.
But it's amazing how time, and as an older person, I appreciate that because I've seen it.
Right.
Okay, a younger person who's 20 years old, as long as they've been alive, there's been cell phones.
Right.
So they don't have an appreciation for what this is compared to what used to be.
And what you had in those terminals was way ahead of the adding machines that had,
Sure.
when I was a child. So in our lifetime, cash registers and adding machines have gone to desktop computers, and now cell phones way more powerful than what it took to get a man to the moon.
Yeah, oh, yes. Yeah. It's a marvel to stop and think about the evolution of so many different industries, and not just the evolution, but the actual creation of some. When the internet came into being, it changed. I'm not going to say it changed everything, but it changed a lot of things, and it created enormous opportunities to create wealth by making things better for your customer.
Well, innovation happens in a free market where individuals are left to innovate and keep the spoils of their work.
Right.
Instead of having it conscripted, because there's not much incentive to take a risk. Because to innovate, you generally take some risk. You can lose, and all that you've invested to try to make a new innovation goes away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so nobody's going to do that if they're going to lose every time they're wrong, and have when they're right, have it taken away from them.
Right. And so this gets into we're really not digressing from our main subject here, because in government, when the government gives a grant, they're not looking for a profit. That's not why they made the grant. And so you could say they do it for purely political reasons, and there are some grants that are made for purely political reasons, meaning that the money will be completely wasted from the standpoint of how it benefits anyone other than the government that gave the grant and the person who received it.
We've seen a lot of that exposed in recent months since DOGE was doing its work, and for instance, USAID. They do some good work.
Yes, they do.
Having to do with AIDS prevention in Africa and things like that.
Yeah.
They also give money to have puppet shows in Iraq to promote.
Well, and they also give money to organizations that claim to be doing things that have so much overhead that the money simply gets spent in the overhead and never does actually anything.
Yeah, so it's essentially a way of underwriting a partisan organization outside the strict limits of government.
Yes, and this gets into this, once again, to this thing where if somebody says, well, look what good thing we did in Africa, that's the exception.
Yes.
That's not the rule.
Right.
And so by saying, look at that one good thing, therefore I should spend all this other, I should be able, in order to do that one good thing, I need to be able to spend 100 times that much on my buddies and my cronies because they helped me get where I am politically. So,
let me read this quote that I
please,
found in
sure.
preparing for today that kind of touches on this. This is from Frederick Bastiat,
Oh,
who wrote a book called The Law. It's a very short book, and this was after the French Revolution, where you had a lot of statist impulses for the government to just take over everything. And he was so sharp in opposition to this. And so here's what he said. Socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to it being done at all. We disapprove of state education. Then the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to state religion. Then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to a state-enforced equality. Then they say that we're against equality. And so on and so on. It's as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we don't want the state to raise grain.
that's
Okay?
really good.
So I think he's pointing to this
really
confusion about there's a disagreement about how we should do things, not whether we want
right.
equality and prosperity and
Well, or actually, if you're going to provide education, what is the best way to provide a high quality education?
yes,
What's the best way to do it?
right.
And so, for example, that's a wonderful book, by the way. I've read it. I carry it around with me, actually. I probably read that book, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. And what you just read to me, it was not something that I remembered. Now, it doesn't surprise me what you read, but it's a great book. It's called The Law. And
Bastiat, Bastiat.
Yes, and it's a very short book, but
Right.
it's not a book you're going to, if I tell you it's a 40-page book, you're not going to say, okay, well, I'll read that in 20 minutes. You're not going to read this book in 20 minutes. Every page has something to think about.
Very resonant.
Yes, it's like, Mike, it's like the Declaration of Independence. I encourage everyone to read the Declaration of Independence and read it by sentence and read it by paragraph and then reflect, because there's no wasted words in there.
Yes.
The Law by Bastiat is
similar.
very, very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me mention one other thing in this regard. It, to me, is the best explanation of why the private sector and public sector are different on this efficiency score. It comes from a guy named Ludwig von Mises. You're familiar with him. He was part of the Austrian school that we just mentioned a moment ago.
He was Hayek's teacher.
Hayek's teacher, yes. And we happened to meet von Mises' widow when we were starting our business together, if you remember that.
I have a book signed by her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we were very taken with the Austrian School of Economics. So he wrote a book called Bureaucracy. Now, let me say, I do not recommend anybody go buy this book. It is thick as thieves. It's very tough to read. Just the language that he presents things in.
Now, let me say, Michael.
Did you read it?
Yes, and it's not the book that's really, really long is Human Action.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy is actually not that long.
It's
very
not
dense.
that long.
Very dense.
This is my point. It's not easy to read.
No, it's not, but it's good.
It's good, and it's shorter than his book, Human Action.
Yes.
But here's the principle out of that Bureaucracy. He said, a private business must take X and make it worth X plus Y, or else you're out of business. You've got to create value. You take inputs and make them more valuable at the end, and you get a little profit for what's between. Some of it goes to tax, but you create value that way. A government never does that.
No.
It takes 100, and then it distributes 100 minus X. And that's generally 20, 30%. It can be more. But they take what's available, administer that money in some way, and return a part of it to the people that originally paid for it.
And they're never looking for less expensive ways to provide the same or a better service.
Yeah.
They never do, because that's not their nature.
Yeah.
And this is what's key here: is it's not that government officials are inherently bad people. It's that they are in an organization or an institution that is inherently inefficient. And so the person in government who's always looking for and advocating for a cheaper way to provide the same service to the citizens, the other government people don't like that. Because first of all, Do you know what the most important thing in almost all government organizations? I know it's true at the federal level, and I think it's probably true at state and local levels, but the most important single thing that determines how much people at the federal level are generally paid is how many employees work under them.
Yeah.
That's more than any other one thing. And so if you work for me, my job is to help you get more people working for you because that benefits you and it benefits me.
It's the law of organizations generally that they want to grow. Okay, in the private sector, you've got to create more value to be able to pay for more people, make more profits to hire more people.
Yeah, or if you want to make more money and you come to the company and you have a more efficient way to do the work that you're currently doing, and it helps the organization become more profitable, there's a good chance you're going to get a promotion and you're going to get paid you're going to get paid more.
Great outcome for me. What I'm saying is that may not grow the organization. Okay,
No.
It may make it more efficient and smaller.
Right.
Okay? Which is a good outcome in the private sector. It's not a good outcome in the public sector.
Exactly.
But in both sectors, organizations want to grow. In the private sector, you generally do that by becoming more profitable and creating more value for more people.
Yes.
In the public sector, that's not the case, and so that's a problem we have with our deficit now. Is that this has gone on for so long since about the time of FDR. We've said on a prior podcast the government was really very small during Coolidge's administration.
Tiny, and even during FDR, it was a seed. It was FDR planted the seeds because even when JFK became president
in the 60s,
in 1961, the year he became president, federal spending was $100 billion. That was it. $100 billion, $7 trillion now. And inflation has not been 70 times. Okay, so what I'm saying is that government was not very big even when JFK took office, and most of the spending when JFK took office, was defense. It was in the 60s that Medicare passed and Medicaid passed, and then plus Obamacare. Social Security is a growing. It's a growing burden, but the difference between Social Security and Medicare is that people who receive Social Security receive a certain amount, and so if the population is X and a certain amount is Y, you can multiply X times Y to know what the total is. In healthcare, there's no Y. There's no people can get whatever the demand is. Government tries to
they create an entitlement that's not denominated in dollars. It's like a retirement plan that's a defined benefit instead of a defined contribution.
Right.
You know, a company has a defined contribution. Let's say I got to pay $1,000 every year toward your retirement, $10,000, whatever it is. Defined benefit means I got to pay you a certain outcome.
Yeah, but it's
no matter what it costs.
Well, but the benefit, I'm going to quibble with you here because a defined benefit defines the amount of money the company must pay each retiree. And so whether they have the money to pay each retiree that benefit, they have to pay them. And that's a defined benefit. A defined contribution is I'm going to put this much in your retirement account today, and it will either grow or not grow, but that'll be what you get in the future. Healthcare is not like that. Healthcare is, if the way that we like to think about it here is nobody can be denied healthcare. That's the way we think about it.
Whatever it costs.
Whatever it costs, nobody can be denied.
This is what I'm trying to point out.
So there is no upper limit to what I as an individual, as a retiree, getting a benefit from my retirement program, I'm limited to a certain dollar amount per year. That's how much I'm going to get. In healthcare, I might need $2 million a year, $5 million a year. I might, and so you have people, for example, one of the problems, this is digressing a bit, but on Medicaid is that once somebody is on life support, the people who are providing the life support, the provider who's providing life support, is making a pretty good amount of money as long as that person is on life support. But unless the family members say take them off of life support and let them pass naturally, the person gets to stay on life support because the family's not paying for it. The provider's happy to take the money, and the person who's comatose can't make a decision.
Yeah.
And so there's every incentive on all sides to spend the money. So this is where we get into it. Michael, I don't want to get because you had some very specific things that you wanted to talk about that I think are fascinating about the nose under the tent with these things with like Intel, for example, and how a good idea today might be abused and turned into a terrible idea tomorrow because the precedent was started.
Yeah, and so you have, even in recent years, this author points out that when the Federal Reserve bailed out the bond market during the COVID pandemic, this is a quote from the article, Representative Maxine Waters urged Chairman Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve to, quote, impose conditions that protect existing collective bargaining agreements and require eligible businesses to guarantee workers full paid leave, worker representation on corporate boards, and a $15 minimum wage.
Yeah. Now, none of those things had anything to do with health.
Yes.
None
but
of those
they
things.
owned the businesses. They were, and so they were going to impose their political agenda as shareholders in the business.
Right.
This is the point that the author is making.
Yes.
Once you get the nose in the tent, the other side will be glad to expand this to other businesses and to use it as a way of imposing their rules and policy requirements.
Right.
You have this in education where there's just a few colleges in the country that refuse federal student loans. Hillsdale being one in Michigan, I think Grove City in Pennsylvania, and maybe one or two others. They do their own thing as they see it by their own moral lights. Every other university has to follow the government's rules. Right, this is the hook that's got
depending
Harvard
on who the administration is.
That's
and
right.
So now the Trump administration's policies are very different from the Biden administration's policies, and by the way, there's nothing wrong if we're going to have a system where the colleges and universities that take money from the federal government have to adhere to the policies of whoever the administration is. That has to be the nature of the way that works. It's not where I always get my money regardless of what I do, because part of what elections are for is for the voters to be able once every so often to be able to set the agenda, set the policies through the elected officials.
Well, this has cynically been called the golden rule. He with the gold rules.
Yeah, gets to make the rules.
So if you're taking the money, you got to follow the rules of the people that are giving you the money.
Yeah. And there have been a lot of very interesting court cases here since Trump has come into office on where he is changing the rules. And he's saying, I think colleges, universities who accept federal money should be providing education in a different way, doing differently. Their policies ought to be different. And now those schools are saying, no, we don't want to do it that way. We like the way we were doing it. So they go to court. And the courts, generally speaking, are siding with the Trump administration, meaning they're siding with the voters who voted him into office and saying Trump promised to do these things.
He has the right to set these policies.
He has the right to set these policies. And there are a lot of people who say, well, that's wrong. That shouldn't be that way. But then it's kind of like, the metaphor that I like to use is if somebody goes to a store and buys a board game that allows 6 people to play the game and nobody's ever played the game before, well, the first thing that all 6 people will do is learn what the rules are of the game. And then the game and then everybody says, okay, well, let's play the game. Well, at the end of the game, is there going to be a winner? Almost every board game I know of, at the end of the game, there's somebody who won the game. And that person won the game because sometime during the game, they got an advantage. And they managed to maintain their advantage until they won the game. But everybody who participated agreed at the beginning that they would play by the rules of the game. And so this is what you have now. And part of what you and I are discussing here, Mike, is that Hillsdale College, when you existed, they take no money from the federal government. And so therefore, they exist, they survive because students who choose to come to Hillsdale pay tuition, and people who want to contribute to Hillsdale's mission give money to the school.
Yes.
And so they only can exist if they can generate enough revenue, either from tuition or from contributions in order to survive. Once you start taking government money, then the politicians who are elected, they're duty bound to their voters to do what they promised to do when they campaigned. So I just think
let's draw a parallel
please.
to NPR and CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Yep.
They've been cut off now
Yep,
from
they
the
have been.
federal dole. Okay, now we hear it I hear it every week. They're now asking their donors to make up the gap.
Right.
I think that's entirely appropriate.
Sure.
Their users ought to be paying the bill.
Right.
What is wrong with that?
Right.
Now, you hear a lot of groaning from the left that this ought to be provided by the government. Here you're back to the quote that I read from Bastiat. If it's worthy of having, the government ought to pay for it. No, I think our side of the aisle would say, no, the user ought to pay for it if they want it, else it need not be paid for. They're not willing to pay for it.
Well, and this gets into the question of whether or not it generates a service that is good enough to support itself. And so NPR they're not trying to be profitable. They're trying to be a nonprofit organization providing a national public radio, providing a radio. They have radio stations all across the country that cost money to produce. They can now sell advertising if they want to.
Yeah.
They can now take contributions if they want to. And if the combination of the advertising revenue and the contributions don't pay for the cost of providing the content, there's plenty of content available. They should naturally go away.
Yeah.
They should naturally
find
go
some
away.
other way of doing business, but that way is not going to work.
Right. And the same thing true with public television.
Yeah.
And so that's now what is going to happen.
Yes.
And they now are free to. They can provide whatever slant they want to, and they no longer have to claim that they're unbiased in
Yes.
order to get federal dollars. They can be as biased one way or the other as they choose to be, and that's a good thing.
And they may end up way more prosperous if people who support their message are willing to pay for them to get it out.
I read an article this morning where some of the people, in this case it's right leaning and left leaning. Tucker Carlson, I think financially is doing much better with the Tucker Carlson network than he was doing, even though he was making very good money at Fox. I think he's making more money now. So that would be an example of somebody on the right who prospered by being fired. Joy Reid was fired from MSNBC. I've heard that she has she charges $8 a month to subscribe to her Substack feed, and they say they don't give the numbers, but apparently she's doing very well with that. Now, she has a very, very strong, what I would describe as a very left-leaning message, but she's free to do that. And so she may personally end up being better off not being associated and paid by MSNBC.
This is the market at work. If people want that and there's demand for it, they will pay for it, and she will be well rewarded for providing it.
Right. Now, Steve Colbert, his show will be terminated next May. And there was a big tizzy about that. Well, it was losing $40 million.
A year.
$40 million a year. And so Stephen Colbert can now choose to either retire because he's done very well, or he can do something. And there were a lot of people who thought that somehow or another the government should intervene, which I didn't understand that at all. Mm-hmm. Somehow the government should intervene to make it so that they couldn't terminate a show that was losing $40 million a year. Never did understand that. But anyway, it's what the consumers of products or services or news in this case or entertainment, what they choose to support that determines what's available.
Let's comment a little bit about how this affects private charitable giving.
Okay.
Which is not something that comes to the tip of the tongue when we're having this conversation. But this is a very insightful quote from a guy named Ted Malloch. He's Theodore Roosevelt's grandson.
Okay.
I happen to have met Ted, and he wrote a book called Being Generous. He's also written about spiritual capital. This guy is fairly oriented toward the intangible, the spiritual.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so here's what he says. On the whole, socialism in any form has shown itself to be hostile to private giving. Such giving does not merely marginalize the state, but also demonstrates too much respect for private property, industry, and wealth, commodities that are hardly compatible with the socialist objective of a strictly equal society in which nobody has any more than anybody else. We should not be surprised, therefore, that one of the first acts of Lenin after the Bolshevik revolution in Russia was to abolish and expropriate all private charities. The same happened in other countries that fell under the Soviet yoke after World War II. When the communists took over Hungary, which is one of these Soviet yoke countries, there were some 10,000 voluntary societies in that tiny country of 8 million souls. Every one was abolished within 2 years. Charity was made illegal, as in all other communist countries. Gift, as the sign and symbol of private property and of a life in freedom outside the control of the state, was anathema to the Communist Party as it is in China today. People had to give in secret and at risk of imprisonment. Underground schools and universities, underground churches, and underhand medicine survived, but only thanks to heroic actions by the few. The socialist assumption is that for the state, not the individual, that it is for the state, not the individual, to provide for those in need.
Yeah, and by the way, let me mention, and I appreciate you reading that, everything that we're talking about here, we're going to have on the website, and because you did some really nice outline work with some great quotes.
Yes.
There'll be links to that, and if people find anything that we're talking about today to be of interest, go to the website from our generation and find the link to the August 22nd podcast and your notes, because a great outline.
We'll put them on there.
It'll be there, and this is great work.
So this point about charitable giving is really interesting to me because I've heard of Europeans moving to the United States do not give to charities because their assumption is that's the government's job to pay for that. I don't need to pay for it, and I've already paid it in my taxes, right? And so it's basically a resignation from accountability or from attention to these kinds of things. In the private sector, people who do well generally, I think, want to help others. Okay.
Well, and people, I've just read, I don't know if this gets that, but people who attend church regularly tend to be more charitable than people who don't attend church at all.
Yes.
Which is kind of an interesting thing. It would also be interesting to know if people who live in blue states tend to be more charitable than people that live in red states. That would be an interesting thing because red states generally are lower taxed.
Yes.
That's all I'm really trying to do is distinguish between the level of taxation and nothing else.
Yes. Tocqueville, when he came to the United States in the early 1800s, one of his major observations was there were all kinds of voluntary societies.
Yes.
And they were doing this kind of work in the private sector, very community-oriented. We don't have nearly as much of that. And some social observations have been about stripping away. Bowling Alone is this book about people are not doing things as, Rotary groups, and other civic groups, private groups going out to have their community together. Even something as simple as not having a front porch, and now you have a back porch and a TV where you don't see your neighbors. Right, so this neighborly concern and connection is a private sector kind of thing as opposed to leaving it to the government.
Yeah. So, Mike, what other major themes do you have on this? Because what we've tried to cover today is bigger government beneficial to society at large, or is a bigger private sector? Then you've talked about government involvement in individual companies. One of the other things that's interesting, and there's always debates about this. For example, here in Tennessee, is the Governor Lee and his administration gave significant benefits by promising things that the state would do if Ford located their new factory in West Tennessee, and the state already owned that land, and so they agreed to build roads and to do other things and give some tax benefits to the company that would then benefit the company once they located here. So it's an interesting question: is if I'm the state and I own the land, and I say if you build a $5 billion factory on the land I'm going to give you, I will not charge you property taxes for 10 years. How do you describe the financial benefit? It's an interesting question because the state already owned the land and it wasn't getting any taxes on it to begin with.
Yes.
So now it's got a $5 billion factory on it and it's still not getting any taxes, but there's 6,000 people working there making good money and paying sales taxes.
And sales taxes and income taxes.
And income taxes. Well, no, not income taxes. Not in Tennessee, thank goodness. But
that's right. That's right.
But property taxes for the homes they own.
Yes.
For homes they live in.
That's right.
So they're paying sales taxes because they're buying things.
Yeah,
and so
their income tax would just go to the federal government. That has nothing to do with Tennessee.
Right.
So you're
just
right.
the state. So it's an interesting question. And so you hear a lot about that with states. Georgia, for example, has a huge subsidy apparently or tax credit for the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
And the entertainment industry in Georgia has become huge because doing movies and things in California has become so expensive.
Yes.
And in Georgia, it's not as expensive, and so there's a benefit there. Those are interesting questions, but because they're done at the state level, and because, as you pointed out earlier, there's competition between the states, there's a limiting factor. There's a limit to how much an individual state can do, and let's just say it's stupid. I'm not saying it is. Let's say that a state wants to do something really stupid. There's only a limit to how stupid they can be because they can't print money.
Right.
The federal government can be as stupid as it wants to be because it can, and it does.
Yes. There's two things I'd like to make sure we include. One is talk a little bit about commons. We talked about the greatest good for the greatest number earlier as a way of thinking about
which ought to be the way government people should think. That's the way. What produces the most for the most number?
Well, there's a temptation in that to really emphasize the commons, what we all have in common. And economic, anybody who studied economics knows this is a problem of who's got to pay for the benefits that come in the commons, right? If nobody is individually responsible for it, how do you raise the money? This was a problem in the Articles of Confederation. We had a big war expense, and nobody particularly had to pay for it.
Right.
Who's going to pay that bill? And the
Right.
Constitution came about as a solution for that.
Right.
So if you think the commons is very huge, and so things like, think about utilities, water supply, fire protection.
Or water. Not just water supply,
water
but
rights. Yeah. I'm thinking about businesses like utilities, that tend to be natural monopolies. Instead of having 40 different phone companies, at one time they all consolidated down to one, AT&T, right? But now innovation has taken over in the private market. Phones are much better than they were when AT&T had a monopoly.
Sure.
Right. And so my point is, what is commons? Somebody that believes in the private sector would see a very limited area of problem for the commons because the innovation can segregate out customer segments.
Nashville has, using what I know, Nashville has a I don't call Metro Water Sewer Service or not, but the government in Nashville owns the water and sewer company. And we pay when we pay our water bill and our sewer bill, we pay for that.
Right.
And whether or not we're paying a fair price is not knowable, because there's only one.
That's right.
There's only one provider, so we don't know if we're getting a good deal or a bad deal. We just know that we're getting water that's acceptable, and we're getting our sewer handled.
Right.
And so it's hard to know if it's good or bad. Now, a common that's interesting, where there's a lot of politics involved, is air quality, because air is something that if somebody pollutes, and they pollute in a particular location, but they're polluting air that then is dispersed, that's a problem.
Right.
And so consequently, that's where government has been involved. Now, I'm not talking about climate change. I'm just talking about air quality. And our air quality, I can tell you, when we lived here in the 50s, Nashville was powered by coal. And in the 30s and 40s, it was even more powered by coal. People who went to work took two shirts. They took a white shirt to work, and they changed it at lunch.
Because it was gray by midday.
It was gray by midday from all the coal dust.
Yes.
And so air quality has improved dramatically. Water quality. There's arguments out west, over the Colorado River, because people want to use that water for different reasons. Well, it flows downstream. And if you're at the bottom of the stream, there's not
you got a problem.
You got a problem.
Yeah.
And so these are great questions that societies have to deal with.
Yeah, and they're great reasons for regulation, right? To
there
cure
are
some of these obvious problems like this.
Yeah, but even there, when we're talking about the Colorado River, is you got either 6 or 7 states that benefit from the water in the Colorado River. Well, they have different interests.
Sure.
And so regulation there is a much tougher nut to crack, because it's you got people with different interests, and the farther up you are on that river, the more you want to use the water.
So there's rich diversity of opinion about this and ways of getting at it. I think what I would say is that for people on the right, the commons is a relatively small category.
Correct.
Okay. For people on the left, it is very large.
Very large.
Where you have healthcare in there, you have education in there. It's basically seen as
Mandani, housing,
food,
groceries. Now you're talking about groceries.
Yes. And when you have a sector that's inefficient, that's taking over that many sectors of the economy because it's seen as a common interest, then you have more poverty.
Well, yes.
Less wealth.
Because Kansas City, the city of Kansas City in 1917 or 18 opened up a city-owned supermarket. It was a beautiful supermarket. It lost $29 million. One store lost $29 million in 5 years or 6 years, and it closed. Because the people who are running the store, they had no reason to make sure that the store was run well.
And how many grocery stores do we have in the United States? Multiply that 29 million for 5 years, right? So let's say they were losing 6 million a year.
That's about right.
Okay. Well, multiply that by 100,000 grocery stores in the country? I'm just guessing.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a lot.
Tens of thousands at least.
You couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It would break the whole country.
Yes.
And so this is it was interesting to see that Kansas City decided that they could run a supermarket. They thought they could. It's a lot more complicated than most people think, obviously.
And a simple way to understand that is the reason this doesn't work is that they have such low margins, as we talked about
2%
in a prior podcast, 2%. If you're a government employee, you leave at 5 o'clock, whether the produce is rotting or not.
Right.
Right. You don't put it on sale. You just go home.
Right.
And that produce rots, and you now have not a 2% profit, a 5% loss.
Right.
Okay, so the rules of engagement, the lack of a profit motive in the public sector means that those businesses are not going to work.
That's right, and they don't.
And so in general, the government shouldn't be in customer-facing businesses.
Correct.
And the people on the right would say the proper role of government is defense, system of justice, a reliable monetary system,
right,
and very little else.
Right. That's what they would say.
Yeah.
And then the question is, does that lead to the more prosperity for the largest number of people as possible?
Yes.
And so we've tried to discuss what the benefits, what the fences are that ought to be around the public sector. We've talked about some of the fences that ought to be around the private sector.
Yes.
Obviously, for example, you shouldn't be able to just dump stuff and pollute water.
Right.
You shouldn't be able to pollute the air.
Right.
So there are things that the private sector, and by the way, in the old days, private sector companies did those things.
Right.
And
let me amend one comment I made earlier, which is that when people do well, they want to share it with other people. I think that's kind of true, but it's not universally true.
That's right.
And so people on the left see greed on the hands of people who make a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. And there are some.
Yeah.
And there are some truly greedy people.
Right.
And then there are other people who give money away and never tell you that they're giving it away.
That's right.
You don't even know much about that, and so it's generally quiet. But
let me do this. I want to finish with two quotes that just bowl me over.
Okay.
They are from Javier Milei. I think is how you say his name, Milei.
Yeah.
He is now the president of Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the history of Argentina is that it was a big attraction for immigration from Europe. They cultivated German, Italian immigration. It was a rival to the United States in the early 1900s and was a very prosperous country. Then the Peronists, the Eva Perón and Juan Perón, came to power. They basically gutted the country economically, just like Chavez and now Maduro have done in Venezuela.
Yeah, they were hardcore socialists.
Yes, like Castro did in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had, 50% inflation, 200% inflation, just horrible, and a huge public sector that ran everything. And he came in basically preaching hard medicine, okay? And he's been successful, but he is a character. And he says wild things. He's a libertarian. He believes very much in the Austrian School of Economics.
Yes.
He talks about Mises and Hayek. And here's a couple of really great quotes from him. The case of Argentina is an empirical demonstration that no matter how rich you may be or how much you may have in terms of natural resources or how many bars of gold you may have in the central bank, if measures are adopted that hinder the free function of markets, free competition, free price systems, if you hinder trade, if you attack private property, the only possible fate is poverty. The state is not the solution. The state is the problem. Long live freedom, damn it.
Okay.
Now, it's very Reagan-esque. Reagan said the state is the problem, not the solution.
He said, damn it. But,
he didn't say damn it.
Yeah.
but yes. And his other quote is this. His other quote is, the generation of wealth comes from the private sector. The state does not create wealth. The state destroys it. The state can give you nothing because it produces nothing. And when it attempts it, it does so poorly. The idea that where there is a need, there is a right. Listen carefully to this. The idea that where there is a need, there is a right sparks a conflict between infinite needs and finite resources.
That's really good.
That is brilliant to me.
And that's worth somebody reading that, thinking about it, and reading it again.
Over and over.
Yeah.
There's no end to the needs that are involved in an entitlement.
And Michael, I'm going to try to tie this back to our very first podcast where we talked about the nature of time.
Please.
Because at the very beginning, if somebody has nothing, if they have nothing, they do have one thing, and that is time.
Right.
And if they spend that time wisely in the situation that we set them up on the island in podcast 1, then they survived. They were able to employ their time, which was their capital, not to innovate, but in their case, to gather food, to gather water, because all of the natural resources that they needed to live existed, but they had to work in order to put them into a consumable form. Mm-hmm. And then we took that island, we said now there are 10 people on the island, and they then innovate by dividing the labor and end up producing as much in less time.
Yeah, this is what I meant by saying they innovate. This is how they get better.
Yes, and
live better. Then they build a bridge,
and that's what societies do.
Yes,
but the point that is when you have a government, the government still has to consume in order to survive. The people who are now in the government, they now have to consume, and they're not producing as they were producing before. And that's why if you have a small government, you have more people producing. If you have a big government, then you're going to have fewer people producing and more people who are consuming, which means that the overall wealth per person is much lower.
Reduced.
Is much lower.
Yes.
And that's what happened to Argentina. And their situation had to get where inflation was between 150 and 200% before the population, when they had an election, picked Milei. And then he has done what he promised to the extent that he could, because there's still a parliament or still a legislative body, and so he's not been able to do everything that he said he wanted to do, but he's accomplished a great deal, and so it's a great lesson,
right?
To look at.
Right.
Well, Mike, I appreciate your time today, as always.
This has been fun.
And once again, it's from our generation, and the August 22nd. When the link to your notes, which are terrific, great work here, they'll be there on our website.
Yeah. Okay. See you soon.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.